Join us now for Education Matters, a weekly look at the real people and real stories in education across North Carolina.
Welcome to Education Matters, presented by the Public School Forum of North Carolina. I'm Keith Poston. Does having at least one black teacher make it less likely a black student will drop out of school? Or how about more likely to go to college too? Our first guest today says yes, and she has the research to back it up based on student data from right here in North Carolina. We're also going to talk to her about discipline disparities for students of color and meet the founder of a youth mentoring program in Durham, all on today's show. Before we tackle our main topic, we always open with our Edlines, a quick scan of education headlines across North Carolina and the U.S. On last week's program, we talked with leaders from Durham about the potential takeover of two of its elementary schools by the North Carolina Innovative School District. After taping last week, one of the schools, Lakewood Elementary, was dropped from the list of 6 schools under consideration. Glenn Elementary remains on the list, along with 3 other schools located in Rocky Mount, Northampton County, and Robeson County. Durham school leaders and parents vow to continue to fight to keep the ISD out of Durham. ISD Superintendent Eric Hall says he will make a final recommendation to the State Board of Education in November, and the board is expected to vote in December. If selected, a school must be handed over to a charter school operator that will be selected by the ISD, or the school must be closed. The General Assembly convened last week for a fast and furious 3-day session, but 2 areas that many in the public education community wanted to see addressed failed to advance. School leaders from across the state have been asking for relief on a K-3 class size mandate they say they cannot afford to implement without new funding or with drastic cuts in teaching positions such as arts, music, and PE. Beyond the personnel costs, many districts say they lack the classroom space and do not have the time or the resources for that either. The North Carolina House seemed ready to address it, but opposition from the Senate forced leaders to withdraw the measure. The other area was principal pay, where the legislature did address one issue where a small number of principals being paid on the teacher pay schedule would lose pay. They did not act, however, on the bigger concern about a significant pay cut that may hit principals next year, mostly our more experienced ones. Some districts fear they will lose many of their best principals to early retirement if these big cuts happen next school year. Finally, a bill introduced by Mecklenburg County Republican Representative Bill Brawley to allow 2 Charlotte area communities, Mint Hill and Matthews, to form their own municipally operated charter schools failed to advance in the Senate. Opponents of the bill fear it will set a bad precedent if suburban communities begin pulling out of the larger school districts, in this case Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, further exacerbating a pattern of resegregation. Supporters of the measure say the communities simply want more choice and options for their students. Representative Brawley said he intends to bring it up again in January. Remember, you can always visit the Public School Forum's website at ncforum.org, click on Education Matters, and read more about each of these headlines as well as the other topics we cover each week. As I said at the top of the show, a new study released earlier this year on the impact black teachers have on black students got a lot of attention nationally because it's rather remarkable findings, and we have one of the authors of that study with us today, Dr. Constance Lindsay from Urban Institute in Washington, D.C.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being here.
Glad to be here.
Now let's first talk about your research.
Sure.
It garnered a lot of attention, and that's why we invited you on the show. How did you study the impact that African-American teachers have on black students?
So basically, this is administrative data from North Carolina. What's nice is the Department of Public Instruction here keeps records on students and makes them available to researchers. So we were able to look at over 100,000 student records of black students entering 3rd grade between 2001 and 2005. And what's nice about the administrative data is that you're then able to look and see, you know, did they go to high school? When did they graduate? Did they go to college? And so basically what we end up finding is that having at least one black teacher in grades 3, 4, or 5 leads to decreased rates of dropout and higher rates of attending college.
So so the data that's available, I mean, obviously this isn't identified by name,
Right,
but this matches up the students, and so you know what the demographics and the race of the students and the teachers. So you've been able to track really for an entire sort of 12 years,
Yes,
if you will,
yes,
right?
yes.
So that's what really got me when I saw the initial news reports. just one teacher, just one black
Just one
teacher
black
for a
teacher.
black student made a big impact. How big of an impact in terms of dropout rates?
So for all students, it's about 30%, and then we found even larger impacts for what we defined as persistently low-income young black boys. And so those are students who were eligible for free and reduced price lunch the entire time they were in elementary school.
So you talked about, in addition to dropout rates, you also tracked likelihood of attending college. Now, how do you determine that based on data?
So when you graduate from high school in North Carolina, you fill out a little survey that says, I'm going to attend a 4-year college, I'm going to attend a 2-year college, or I'm not going to college at all. So it's basically a signal of your intent to attend college. So we're able to see that.
Do you, now we titled this episode Black Teachers Matter.
Okay.
Because
Yes.
it seemed pretty much
Yeah.
that it did. And it was just, you know, again, you've got the data. I trust the data because
Yes.
I've looked at your report, and we do
Okay.
have it on our website,
Okay,
so folks
great.
who want to look at all the information. But it's definitely a valid and clear difference. Just one teacher.
Just one black teacher. But I think that gives us a little bit of hope, right? So one of the things we know nationally, both in North Carolina, is that we don't have the numbers of teachers of color that we'd like. But if it's just one, I think maybe we can think about how we distribute our current teachers to maybe get some better results for our kids.
All right, so that, I mean, it begs the question, if you get better results from just having one black teacher, does it make a difference if you have 2, 3, 4 throughout your school career?
That's a really good question. So we're only looking at those elementary school years for this particular study. And what we found is if you just sort of limit it to 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, it's just one during that time period. So it's not a real difference if you have 2 or if you have them in a particular order. So no dosage or timing effects.
Right. Now, you've obviously looked at the demographics, you know, for all students. Did you see similar effects for, say, white students with white teachers or white students with black teachers?
So that's a great question. So for this particular study, we just limited the analyses to black students and sort of looking at that comparison between having a white teacher and a black teacher during those years. In some of our other studies, we also look at the impacts for white students and usually find that there's no negative impact of white students having a black teacher.
Right. Were you able to tell, because you can see where the schools are, were there any differences at all across the state? This was a pretty wide swath of data. So you had urban, rural, east, west, no difference at all?
So we didn't look at sort of where the schools were. This is just statewide. So we literally have every single school in the state. So this is sort of the average impact across the entire state.
All right, let me shift gears a little bit, although we're going to continue to talk about that, so in particular in our next segment too, because I do want to explore and have a conversation about why.
That's right.
You know, because, and then sort of what do we do about it. But you also did a study looking at discipline disparity. It's something we've talked about on this show. So again, what are we talking about when we talk about discipline, exclusionary discipline? What are we talking about?
So we also use the same set of administrative data to look at students at all levels, elementary, middle, high school, over the years of 2008 to 2013. And basically what we found is that being matched to a black teacher leads to lower levels of exclusionary discipline. So these are, you know, when you're suspended out of school, in school, expulsion. So the sort of more harsh disciplines that students might receive.
Do these tend to be the ones that are more subjective disciplines? Because I know that in North Carolina, the expulsions and things are sort of marked. You've got things like, you know, if you bring a gun to school, you get caught with drugs to school, it's sort of an automatic. There's almost like mandatory minimums in the criminal justice. But does the disparity show up when it's more subjective?
That's right. So we find that most of the effects are driven by what we call willful defiance acts, and those are the ones that have the most teacher discretion. So those are the ones that involve teachers reading students' behavior, and so we think there's something about that match that causes, maybe causes black teachers to read students' behavior differently than other teachers.
And so, but now, did you see, again, I'll ask you this sort of similar question. You've got the data, so did you see any difference in terms of white students? I mean, white students being treated better, worse, the same, depending on the race of the teacher?
So we found, so we have some earlier versions of the study where we found that basically everybody does better when they have an African-American woman teacher. And not that I'm biased or anything, that's just what happened. But we also found some interesting sort of delineations. We found that for low-income white men, they also do better with having a black teacher. So there might be some cultural things that are happening.
Fascinating. Well, we're going to continue this conversation. We're going to add on our next guest, but So when we come back, I'm going to introduce you to Atreus Good from Durham, from a movement of youth. But first, see if you can answer this question, viewers. In 1989, 1 in 50 black students in Charlotte attended a hyper-segregated school. That is a student with a minority student population of 90 to 100%. What was that ratio in 2010? Welcome back to Education Matters. Did you correctly answer D? In 1989, 1 in 50 black students in Charlotte attended a hyper-segregated school, again, a school with a minority population of 90 to 100%. By 2010, and today, it's about 1 in 3 black students. Joining us now to continue our discussion is Atreus Good. Atreus is the president and CEO, founder of Movement of Youth in Durham, North Carolina. Thanks for being here, Atreus, and Dr. Lindsay continues to be with us. Now, Atreus, I invited you to come on the show because I just recently had the opportunity to hear your personal story about the impact that mentors had on you, and I had just been following Dr. Lindsay's research. So, share with us your story, sort of about the impact it had on you.
Sure. Well, my early life was a bit challenging. So my mom, she used drugs for quite a while when I was growing up. And my dad raised me throughout a portion of that, and essentially I needed a way to transition out of that. And so eventually I was matched with a mentor through the Greater Charlotte chapter of the 100 Black Men of America, and their motto is what they see is what they'll be. So again, this idea of visioning, that it's important to see people that look like you in positions of influence to help you to then see yourself in that space. Yeah,
I like that, because that when you said that the other day, like what you see is what you'll be. I mean, I immediately thought, because we're going to talk about this in this segment, Dr. Lindsay's research is that what he's describing about the impact of mentors, probably a decent hypothesis about some of the effects that you're seeing in the research.
That's right, yeah, so you can totally think about this role model effect. So just seeing a college-educated black teacher might be something that signals kids that they also can go to school, right? You can imagine that, if you don't, particularly for these persistently low-income black boys, if you don't have that at home, having it at school might be the mechanism that causes you to not drop out of high school.
What was, you were obviously paired, I guess, was it more than one mentor or others around you? What was the impact? How did, when you look back now, obviously, it's been a little while, but so what were you thinking about it? So what did it do to you?
So I did have multiple mentors, and it's interesting. I was talking before the show. When I was growing up, my dad actually read the newspaper to me before I got to school, and so when I was in kindergarten, I was actually able to read. And my first teacher was a white woman, and I was reading out loud one day, and she asked, well, hey, are you reading? And I said, yes. And then she asked, did you memorize that book? And I didn't understand why she would ask me that, but then she started to pull other books from the classroom to see if I could actually read. And fast forward, I was actually asked to go to the principal's office to prove myself.
Wow.
And so this notion of me perhaps not being gifted was something that came up, and I was actually placed in the gifted program when I was in second grade, and that's when I had a black teacher.
Wow. And that's something, look, this is not your research, but this is research that we've seen. There are trends that show that there may be sort of, let's say that black teachers have higher expectations of black students, and conversely, because of whether it's implicit bias, whatever, that white teachers may have not have the same standards. Right. So it sounds like what you're saying, at least even as early as kindergarten.
Oh, absolutely.
That showed up for you.
Yeah.
What about the discipline data? We talked about that just a little bit. The kinds of things we're talking about is you see a gap in terms of sort of how students are punished in school?
Yeah, so we certainly see these discipline gaps. And so one of the things that we talk about at the end of the discipline paper is maybe thinking about teachers as gatekeepers, right? So, they have discretion to decide whether they send someone to the principal's office or if they, just basically how they interpret behavior might be different. And I think that has some implications for how we train teachers and think about sort of the teacher workforce as a whole.
Yeah, that's one of the things I thought about is, we've spent a lot of money in this country talking about the trying to close the achievement gap. I mean, I like to call it the opportunity gap, but there's clear differences in academic achievement between black and white students. This research says, maybe what we need to really be focusing on is the teacher workforce. It would be, and one could argue, might be a lot cheaper than some of the things we're doing.
Yeah, that's one thing that we say. There's sort of short-term and long-term implications, and one of the short-run implications is let's think about how to distribute black teachers, across cities and states so that more teachers or more black students can have exposure to them, and that's something that I think hiring administrators can do not easily, but it's something they can think about.
Yeah, we have teacher recruitment challenges of all color,
of all
right?
colors. That's right. That's right.
Now, Atreus, tell me a little bit about. I do want to give an opportunity to talk about moving to youth and just about the work you're doing in mentoring, because I think you buy into you got some good research now to back it up, but you buy into this notion that all students need to see positive role models.
Right. So moving to youth, we do a number of things. So mentoring, college tours, we have a global fellowship, and we give out college scholarships, and we're run primarily by college students. And so this notion of having someone that is not that far removed from where you are, and they also look like you, so giving you access to someone that's already been able to navigate some of those challenges. One of the things that we're actually transitioning into now is doing some work with the National Mentoring Partnership, and so looking to relaunch Mentor Carolinas, and so this will be an affiliate across North and South Carolina that looks at the ways in which we can leverage various mentoring agencies to share best practices. But one of the things that I'm interested in is looking at how do you leverage mentoring for racial equity and social justice, because my personal experience with the 100, and I think it was a great organization, but a lot of what I was taught implicitly was that there's a particular way that I have to behave in order to be successful. So these cultural gymnastics of black and brown people know this code switching, that you have to show up in certain ways in order to receive respect. And I think that reinforces this notion that the onus is on that student to show up in a particular way, and I think it fails to address the larger systemic issues that create the need for mentoring agencies in the first place.
Right. Well, I'm glad you brought this up. This is important stuff, but we have to keep talking about it. Last word for you, Dr. Lindsay, sort of what's next?
What's next? So we're going to be doing some research on the relationship between teacher and principal race and thinking about teacher turnover. One of the things that we know is that black teachers are actually leaving the profession at higher rates than white teachers. And so that's something to understand. I mean, we want them to stay once we get them. So just broadly thinking about teacher diversity and how we can get a diverse, high quality workforce. And also just thinking about ways that all teachers can work with all students and maybe reforming teacher prep, all things teacher diversity for me.
All right, terrific. Well, we appreciate you both coming on. You're doing important work. We appreciate you sharing it with our viewers. I learned a lot myself today,
Great.
so thanks so
you.
much. After the break, our Leadership Spotlight. Each week, Education Matters spotlights individuals demonstrating exceptional leadership in education based on nominations from you, our viewers. This week, we spotlight Dan Schnitzer, who has helped build a really strong sustainability program. In fact, they won a number of awards, including the U.S. Department of Education's Green Ribbon School District. Take a look.
Schools play an integral role in not only teaching sustainability, but implementing sustainability. Our school district has over 2 million square feet and hundreds of acres of land. So we have a real opportunity to be a positive influence. So we do a lot of work in sustainability in our district and the administrative end on energy management. That not only has a positive environmental impact, but every dollar that we're able to save on utilities, we can bring back into the classroom and into educating. And one of the really fun experiences that I have is to be able to tie that into student education. One of the things we do whenever we use LED lights is bring in a pedal power generator, where the kids actually use their physical strength and their physical energy to power up an incandescent, a fluorescent, and an LED light. and they can feel the difference. When we talk about energy savings, it's a concept, it's a philosophy. Maybe best case scenario it shows up on an energy bill. But when you're the one actually producing the energy, you can really get a sense of what that means to save energy. And we can tie that into science lessons on potential energy, kinetic energy, mechanical energy, and then into electrical energy. We can talk about economics. So yeah, the LED bulb costs more. Let's mark that on a graph of where it costs, and then let's mark where an incandescent light bulb costs. And let's see how much it costs to operate and where those lines intersect and what that point means and what the different areas on the graph means. I do a lot of worm composting with students. So all of our cafeterias compost their food waste. We've diverted over 800,000 pounds in 3 years. We'll cross 1 million pounds this year. And we've got 12,000 students every day that are diverting their food waste. And so to really understand what that process is, I'll go around with my worm bin, and students will get to look at worms and analyze them. And it could be in the context of habitats, it could be in the context of life cycles, it could be in the context of soil science or of composting itself. And through that, they're able to understand that when they put their food waste in their compostable trays in the green bin, that the process has just started. All the gardens that we do, I always make sure if we're doing it in boxes that there's one box that doesn't get planted in. And the reason for that is because kids like to just dig in the dirt. And even when we have gardens, so many adults want to say like, no, don't dig in there, we put the vegetables in there. But let's let kids dig in there. I think we have the real opportunity with the youngest students to start them off on this path in the right way, but I also really love engaging with the older students that maybe have started to drift from their relationship with nature. As humans, over time, we see technology and we see progress as a way of separating out from nature. But I don't think as humans we ever lose our general instincts towards nature. And part of this work is reconnecting that.
If you know someone that deserves to be recognized, please visit our website, ncforum.org, click on Education Matters, and you'll find a link to nominate someone in your community. After the break, this week's final word. Last week, I had the opportunity to attend an education forum hosted by the North Carolina NAACP. One of the panelists at the forum was Dr. Dudley Flood, a school integration pioneer and a friend of the show who has been on with us a few times. He was asked to give his own final word at the forum, and he chose to end by talking about expectations. He said, "Students are not what you think they are, and they are not what they think they are, but they are what they think you think they are." You get that? It's what they think we think of them, what we believe they can do. I'm quite sure Dr. Flood was not just talking about teachers or just about parents. He was talking about all of us, the adults, and whether we let young people know through our words and our actions that we believe they can do anything. Now, I'm not a researcher like Dr. Lindsay, but I suspect that some of the results she found might be tied to this same notion of what a student thinks their teacher thinks of them. I mentioned briefly that there's actually research that suggests that black teachers tend to have much higher expectations for black students than do white teachers. Could we somehow be transmitting that low expectation to the student so that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy? The same study also pointed out that minority students may simply lack role models if they rarely observe or interact with demographically similar individuals who have high educational attainment, like a teacher. Diversity in the teaching workforce has been proven to benefit white students and students of color, but research like Dr. Lindsay suggests that for the black or brown student, it is much more critical, which is precisely why it's a real problem to have a majority minority student population, but an 84% white teaching workforce. Students of color here in North Carolina can easily go through their entire K through 12 school experience and never see a teacher that looks like them, that shares their same cultural experiences. Perhaps it's time, as we continue to look for solutions to this achievement gap, or as I prefer to say, opportunity gap that exists between black students and white students, we better start paying more attention to recruiting a more diverse teacher workforce that looks more like the diverse, multicultural world our children are growing up in. The research shows they will all benefit. That's it for this week's show. We appreciate you tuning in today and every week to Education Matters, and we'll see you soon.